Okay, let's get things started. So welcome aboard everyone who's joined the webinar today. My name's Ollie O'Donoghue and I'll be the host, and we'll be learning about how Husqvarna mowed down its legacy by embracing automation and digital colleagues. Now, luckily you won't have to listen to me this whole time. I have an absolutely charming panel joining me today. Anders Agren from Husqvarna Group, Ritesh Jain from HCL, and Miriam Deasy from HFS. I'm an exceptionally lazy host, so I will ask each of you to introduce yourselves for about 10 seconds, starting with you, Anders. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing over at Husqvarna?
So hi everybody, Anders Agren, transformational lead for what we call Global Information Services. That's the IT department of Husqvarna, typically leads different transformational activities.
Lovely, and over to you, Ritesh.
Hello everyone, I'm Ritesh Jain. I head the technology and transformation for the digital process operations unit of HCL, responsible for artificial intelligence, robotics process automation, and business process as a service. Thank you everyone for joining this. Thank you.
Great, welcome aboard, Ritesh. And last but not least, my colleague and very dear friend, Miriam.
Hey, Ollie. Thank you very much. Miriam Deasy, based in London, Research Director with special interest in automation, especially RPA and automation where it intersects with AI and analytics. Thank you very much.
Lovely. So thanks to our panel. Now, before I hand over to our luminaries, there are a few different bits and pieces we'll quickly go through. The first, of course, is the housekeeping. Now, the really important part of our webinars is we like them to be as interactive as possible. So do ask questions throughout. It's relatively easy on this platform. So at the bottom of your screen, you should see Q&A. If you click on the Q&A icon, it'll pop open a little window where you can type in your question. We've got a little bit of time carved out at the end of the webinar. So ask those questions as we go through, and then I'll put them to our panel towards the end. And here's what we'll cover today. So to set us off, Miriam's going to take us through some market context. So sharing some of our latest HFS data and digging into what's going on, at least what we're seeing going on in that space. And then we'll shine a spotlight on Husqvarna Group and how they've partnered with HCL to deploy automation and digital colleagues. And finally, we'll round off with that Q&A. Now, before we get to that, I will do the most important part for me, which is tell you a little bit about HFS. Now, here at HFS, we have a pretty simple mission, which is to provide visionary insight into the major innovations impacting business operations. And we view that through the digital operations lens, which is where we look at different threads like artificial intelligence, integrated automation, smart analytics, global sourcing, blockchain, and digital business models, and really try to get to grips with how those are shaping modern business operations. Now, to help us on that quest, we have, if I say so myself, a charmingly ambitious research agenda, which we have up in front of us now, where we look at everything from the digital one office, so that concept of what the future business operation model should look like, right through change agents, business functions, all of the key industries, and even throwing in some cool HFS data products and interactive tools into the mix. And here's just a cheeky look at what some of that looks like. To all of those who haven't made it over to our website yet, I would recommend you do so. We have a ton of research. This is just a snapshot of research coverage on HCL over the last couple of months. So that's just a quick snapshot there. Plenty of research, so do head on over to our website after the webinar and have a dig through. There's all sorts of stuff going on there. Now, before I let Miriam talk through the HFS data and insights that we've got in this space, I'd like to do a little bit of research myself. So if we could launch the poll, please, with a question here, which is, what have you found most challenging in your automation journey so far? And the options are identifying processes to automate, getting the right license costs, building and deploying bots, realizing ROI from existing investments, scaling solutions, and figuring out where to start in the first place. Now, all answers are anonymous. There's no judgment here, so do feel free to put wherever you think you are on that list out of those options. And I think what we'll do, Miriam, if I hand over to you now, you can take us through some of the data that you've been digging through, and then we can circle back at the end and see what everyone's put. And that way, everyone's got a bit of time to figure out which of those buckets they fit in. So over to you, Miriam.
Sounds fabulous. Thank you very much, Ollie. So if we could move on to the next slide there, we've got one entitled The Digital Workforce That Wasn't. And this is something that we got from last year's State of Intelligent Automation study. And when we look across the breadth of intelligent automation technologies that encompass what we call the Triple A Trifecta of automation, AI, and analytics, we can see lots and lots of pilot projects and lots in the process of transitioning from experimentation into production. But we're not yet seeing as much as we'd like make it through to production in a scaled up and industrialized way. But interestingly, in recent months, what we're hearing since the COVID-19 pandemic took hold is that those who have made progress with these technologies, we're incredibly grateful to have them in place during the upheaval of lockdowns. And this, in fact, prompted one of our colleagues, Elena Christopher, to write a piece entitled, "Don't You Wish You Had Done More? The Digital Workforce That Was finally has a real chance to shine." So check that one out on the website if you want to find out more about that. But what we have seen during the pandemic is people using RPA to process spikes in transaction volumes, such as refunds or payment holidays or loans. And we've seen chatbots handling the many questions that people ask, the many similar questions that people ask, and digital channels being used to broadcast rapidly changing information out to the masses. So our advice to organizations working with these technologies is to take a swift inventory of what they've amassed in terms of AAA Trifecta assets so far, not just in the platforms and tools, but the surrounding knowledge and experience that creates confidence with the technology in order to determine cross-functional potential and deploy them elsewhere. So if we move to the next two slides are, we'll just do them one at a time though. The next two slides are very specific to some data that we drew in as the lockdowns took place. So we talked with 600 large enterprises, and we also talked with vendors, and we asked, how do you expect COVID-19 to impact your spending or your clients' spending? And if you are familiar with some of our other webinars that we've done recently, we talk a lot about paradigm shock, and we talk about a series of phases that everyone's moving through at their own pace. And like our digital one office, the AAA Trifecta is very dependent on kind of an underlayer of cloud that's secure. Like this is kind of table stakes here, these ones. But it's interesting to note that what we term our AAA Trifecta, automation, analytics, and AI, are all up here along with cloud and cybersecurity in the bunch that consistently everybody's expecting to see more spending activity in. Whereas what appears to be in the, or what quite clearly is in the lower bunch here, is some of the more challengingly new stuff. Which people think that there could well be a pullback on at this point. So this is telling us that we will see, not quite aggressive, but we'll definitely see acceleration in what we have circled up in the first bunch there. But it remains to be seen what's going to happen with the second bunch that's down lower. So next slide, please, Ollie. And I'll talk a little bit about something very interesting that's happening at the moment. So if we can kind of view this as sequential. So in the initial stages of the pandemic, everybody was extremely concerned with how to keep going, how to keep operating, how to survive the initial shock of how much was different in the way we all had to operate. And there was a lot of figuring out how to work from home and making sure that remote working environments were accessible, that all the systems that people needed were in place. But once people get over those shocks, then the next logical thing is taking a good look at, well, where are we on digitization? Because the more digitized we are, the easier this all is, right? And the most interesting one is, it's, I've been saying this a lot recently, but it's an ill wind that blows no good. And, not to diminish the hardship of the pandemic in any stretch, this is one of the few upsides that we're seeing, is that from so many different corners, we're hearing reports of people talking about how there is a lot less rigid thinking. There's much more openness to different ways of doing things. So this new plasticity is very, very important to help people shift away from that kind of feeling of, well, this is the way we've always done it and this is the way we have to do it. So we think that will in time translate into more activity in the last two items on this graph, which is automation and AI. So those decisions that are being made right now about how could we do things differently, how could we change our operating models in this environment to secure that all important agility and resilience that everybody's really, really yearning to to increase at the moment. So there's lots of curiosity about new. There's all sorts of things coming up on the table for discussion that maybe have been on the table before, maybe not. Things have been tried, things that have never been tried, things that were never considered are coming on the table. So new modes of operating are definitely under consideration right now. But finalizing decisions is still a challenge, and the cost pressures are absolutely enormous. So the last thing I'll say on this slide, so we're nearly ready to go to the next, is that, you know, a focus on cost alone is going to be a finite road, whereas a stretch towards the top line has potentially infinite impacts. And if we go to my last slide here, Ollie, then if we shift away from that kind of cost-cutting focus and we talk to people about what benefits do you see, this kind of brings us back right to where I started with that slide about people having difficulty getting significant operational impact from their automation progress to date. So when these lever pulls are pulled simultaneously, AI, analytics, and automation, it's that shift away from the siloed, task-based approach to get something that translates into scale, either by tackling end-to-end processes or by allowing for scale across enterprises. So that's pretty much me on my slides for the moment, but are we ready to look at the answers to the poll questions at this point? And then we'll start talking with Ritesh and Anders. Okay. Ollie, did you want to take over here?
Yeah, absolutely. So is that up on the main screen? Let's have a dig through the data that we have here. So the biggest one, realizing ROI from existing investments, very popular there, 41%. Scaling solutions, another popular one, 35%, almost tied with identifying processes to automate. So it seems like there's a lot of guidance needed to help figure out how to get from a concept stage up to something that actually starts delivering some investment value. And of course, figuring out where to start in the first place, really interesting one for a lot of organizations still trying to figure out what their journey looks like and which levers they pull. So thank you to everyone for joining us in that poll. I don't think we have any others. So if you do have any questions or anything like that, then pop them in the question box and we'll go through those at the end. Back to you, Miriam.
Okay, so Ritesh, I wonder if I could address you for a moment. So well done to you at HCL for getting Husqvarna's attention with your digital colleagues vision. And we're going to talk to Anders about his progress with digital colleagues in just a moment. But for those who may not know HCL as well as we at HFS do, can you take a quick minute to tell us what we should know? Just a few quick fast facts about how long you've been around, how many customers you have, and anything else we should know.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Miriam. So if we move on to the next slide, that gives a quick overview of what we do at HCL. Overall, roughly $10 billion in revenue, 150,000 odd employees. We call them ideapreneurs because we strongly believe that for us to be successful in the business that we are in and to make sure we contribute to our customers' journey, we have to focus on innovation. We have to focus on how do we bring technology at the root of it? How do we deliver value through ideas? Now, what are the key differentiators, right? As we see in the pandemic like COVID, the engineering DNA is very, very important. I saw something on social media in which someone said, what got the maximum digital adoption in your organization? Was it your CEO, COO, or COVID? And a lot of people said COVID. So apparently technology, digitization is becoming a root of everything that we do. And to ensure that we are successful along with our customers, HCL believes in going beyond the contract, essentially making sure that the work gets done, we deliver value together. Because at the end of the day, the customers that our customers serve are important, and we need to make sure they get what they need. Now, slightly switching gears and getting into the entire concept of digital colleague in the next slide. What we are focusing on when during my last couple of years of being in the transformation industry, what I realized was when I talk to customers are looking at buying a business outcome. They say that I'm looking at automating my invoice processing. I'm looking at improving my KYC process, customer onboarding process. And while customers were doing that, people like me were talking to them that I can do RPA, this new cool thing, artificial intelligence could come to your rescue. There is a whole new science of process mining. And in a lot of cases, the discussion was pretty confusing for everyone because customers were looking at outcome. Customers like you, your partners, and various partners of ours were looking at business outcome, and we were selling them technology. During that time, we realized we need to change the narrative, the aspect that Miriam talked about around the entire digital workforce. We came up with a concept called digital colleague, because gone are the days where we believe that humans' job will be taken over by technology. Rather, it is the contrary. Just like in my personal space, I use Siri, Alexa, and various other gadgets to perform better. I need the same kind of digital colleagues at my workplace to be able to deliver the right kind of value. And hence we said a digital colleague, which is a combination of various technologies, of course, under the hood, is faster at execution. It can do things repeatedly. It is very predictable and can understand data, can define going in the future what are the benefits that I can get if I were to perform a certain activity. Whereas the emotional quotient, the empathy, making the right decision, program management, managing ad hoc tasks are best done by human being. And hence we are looking at creating a combination of a human workforce and a digital colleague to deliver the next generation of workforce for our customers. And this is something I'm very excited to say. We partnered with Husqvarna, delivered certain outcomes. And again, it is the start of the journey, but various organizations are looking at this combination in which the technology becomes under the hood. It is not RPA alone or the bot. It is a combination of various digital technology with the goal, just like I hire an invoice processor, can I hire an invoice processor digital colleague that can process my paper documents, that can process transaction, that can understand who are my VIP vendors and provide that insight to the human being. So with that, I'll pass it on back to you, Miriam, to take us through the rest of the aspects of the discussion.
That's super, Ritesh. Thank you very much for that. And thank you for clarifying, because it can be confusing with the terminology surrounding bots and flows. So what you have presented here is very similar to the way we talk about integrated automation. You got a whole mix of technologies at play to get a job done, right? So I'm going to switch over to Anders now. So Anders, could we start with a bit about you and your organization? We know Husqvarna is a global leading producer of outdoor power products for forest, park and garden care. And we know you have innovation and sustainability at the heart of your organization. And you have a nice word for that, Sustain-Ovate, which is new to me. I like it very much. So can you tell us a little bit about your role as transformation leader and how it supports your enterprise?
Absolutely. Thanks, Miriam. And thank you for inviting me to share a few thoughts and probably knock in a few open doors. In the role I have, as I mentioned before, it's typically that I lead some kind of transformational activity. It could be an outsourcing engagement, which is actually kind of my background. Now I'm heading up what we call the Business Process Automation Initiative. And if you, what Ritesh said about buying outcomes, it's something we're really looking into right now together with HCL, where we, exactly like Ritesh said, started off looking at technology, going into more some service, outcome-based service model. It's absolutely in the beginning of the discussions, but very, very relevant.
And would you say in your organization, do you have a good culture of innovation? Like your products are very innovative. So does that translate across the whole organization?
Absolutely. So Husqvarna was founded back in 1689 and has survived due to having innovation as a backbone. Absolutely. We've changed our business many times. We started off by manufacturing guns to the Swedish Army. And if you're looking at the top there, you will see our brand, the H, with some kind of circle and a crown. That's you now looking down the barrel of a gun. So that's where we started off. We've brought our history with us. But we have changed, as I said many times. We have manufactured bicycles, motorbikes, kitchen appliances, sewing machines, for decades, chainsaws and watering equipment has been our core products.
Wow.
So if you look at the last decade, robotics has come very strong. And with robotics, you will see two examples in this slide here. You have the bottom side there, you have a remotely managed destruction robot, for example, used in the Fukushima nuclear power plant after the tsunami. And on the top left corner, you see our one example of our robotic mowers.
Wow. And I know we're going to talk robotic a little later as well. So tell me, how did you get interested in implementing digital colleagues? What was it that drew you initially, and what problems were you trying to solve?
Absolutely. So if you change the next slide, please. So actually it started off with HCL that came and presented RPA as an opportunity. And being a pretty curious person, I knew I had to kind of dig deeper into it. We started off with a proof of concept, moved on to a business pilot, and right now we're sitting at our first generation of some kind of automation center, looking into this, building the second generation. And what we try to do in this still grassroots initiative is to leverage functional expertise and its existing system landscape together with automation technologies to support our business by optimizing their ways of working. And my own little vision here is that we from IT should be able to provide the business with capabilities to discover, analyze, and optimize, as well as monitor their business processes.
So I love that you're from IT, because that's something that we think is really important, that very often the business tries to proceed with this on their own, and then IT comes along and has lots of questions to ask. But you've been involved in this from the start, from the IT perspective.
Absolutely. It started with HCL approaching me, and then we started to do some activities, basically.
Okay. So I think you also talk about process data, and I know you had lots and lots.
Absolutely.
You want to tell us
So, absolutely. So if we move on to the next slide. Actually, the first time I heard the terminology or term process that was interacting with HFS the first time.
Claim initial ownership of it. It's used elsewhere as well. But yeah, that's nice that you got a definition there.
About that's the first time I heard about it, at least, and it kind of it sounded so right to me. This was something we were looking at every day. So the creation of awkward and often manual short-term processes designed to buttress aging technologies. I think that was spot on in terms of what we find every day. But what are the reasons for it? I think there is a lot of talk about technical complexity being the cause of process debt. I think it's a bit broader than that, at least from my perspective. We have traditionally looked at what I call the application verticals. These are applications with a specific functional perspective, such as supply chain, HR, manufacturing, and so forth. But the processes are typically has this very dependency between different capabilities, and we have not really been able to keep up with our integrations to keep up with the business. And of course, business is changing all the time. And with the complex technology landscape, this has become, at least for us, very challenging to keep up.
Yeah,
and the business has built these Excel-based processes instead.
Yes, I've also heard it referred to as process sediment. You know, it's something that just builds up and builds up and builds up over time, little by little. Yeah. The load of it gets weightier as time goes on. Are you ready to move on to your predictions, or did you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So if we go to the next slide there, Ollie, we've got a close-up of one of the mowers, which looks a bit amazing, able to operate on slopes of 70% incline. So we'd obviously all like one of those for at home, you know, anytime. But more importantly, you have 3 predictions about how you see automation playing out in your organization, Andrew. So we can step through them one by one. The 3 of them are summarized here, but the next 3 slides go through them one by one. So Ollie, if we go to the next slide, can you tell us a little bit about how you expect the digital workforce to be a natural part of the group's organization?
Absolutely. So first of all, I think predictions is a word I use internally, and the predictions can be quite hard to kind of hit. So it feels a little bit pretentious of me to use the word prediction, but because they are used, these companies are already using this. So it's not like I'm showing it to the market, but for us, these are predictions that we will need to see, I believe will happen for us in the future. And coming back to what I mentioned before, our traditional IT focus has been this ERP, very application capability, functional aspects that we want to keep stable, reliable, and cost efficient. But our business, they're not giving us any applause when we are stable, reliable, and cost efficient. That is something they just assume we are. They also want us to be agile, adaptable, and flexible. Our business does not look the same in France as it does in Germany. We need to be able to adapt. And here I think automation technologies will play a very vital role in the future. And these, in my view, these automation technologies are very close to the business, and business will have a different role compared to what they've had in the more traditional IT. Self-service automation, it speaks for itself. They will manage the automation themselves. RPA, we have the bot controller taking care and operating the bots and so forth.
But you still have guardrails to support the business to ensure that everything is done safely and sensibly, yeah?
Absolutely, absolutely. But the business, I believe, will have a different role.
Okay. So another of your predictions involves that shift from managing transactions to managing exceptions. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that one?
Yes, I can do that. So currently, what we do a lot, at least in Husqvarna, is that we have people supporting our consumers of our internal services with the help of platforms. And I believe that in the future, we will depend much more on platforms being the kind of first point of resolution. This is nothing really new for us. We've done this in the factories for decades, where we used to assemble our chainsaws manually, moving over to robot cells being operated by an operator, basically. What I see, though, is that for the administrative flows of our business, the level of variation is much greater, and it will create exception cases that the platform cannot really manage. And there, I believe that we, of course, need people to pick up on those tasks and make sure that they happen, that they are processed, but also to continuously develop the platforms, reducing the exceptions. Otherwise, we will see those side processes or that process debt increase again.
Absolutely. And if we look at the third prediction that you talk about, you want the group's operation to become event-driven, right? Mm-hmm.
So we have a big challenge in front of us, or actually living in it. We have a very fragmented technology landscape, and it has been beneficial for many purposes, like being very kind of adaptable to the local market, but it also creates quite a lot of challenges. It's hard to get an oversight of our business processes on a global scale. We have challenges in monitoring our performance of our processes. We can absolutely do that in fragment, but get that end-to-end view of how our processes perform is very, very challenging. And if we stumble upon some problems, troubleshooting can be really, really cumbersome. So what we are looking into right now, and Ritesh mentioned the process mining before. So we are looking into connecting our IT events in our different systems to business process steps. And by that, we would be able to have a data-driven approach to map out our processes. Once we clearly understand the events, we could define alerts and start to monitor the processes on an operational level. And I think that will be of a huge benefit to us. No more longer have customers calling us, telling us that they haven't received their products, and we find out that they are stuck on a dock with a third-party logistics company. We, of course, will need a lot more data than we have today to connect all the dots, but that's absolutely something I would like to dig in deeper to.
Yeah, and that data lives everywhere, right? So you need to be
absolutely
in all different corners of the organization. And tell me, in terms of it's often important to ensure that there's some top-down support for these initiatives. So do you see do you find it easy to get that top-down support by linking this to overarching Husqvarna strategy?
Not yet, I would say. I think when it comes to the last one here, we really need to come in with a strong showcase. and see what it can deliver. So we're in a pilot mode here, but we have already done a proof of concept, and for me, value is clear.
Okay, fabulous. Okay, so when you're deciding what to do, how to do it, how do you distinguish between what's tactical and what's strategic when you're thinking about automation?
So
I think we have another slide there, Ollie.
yeah, absolutely. So move on, please. So when we start engaging with our business, they always want to do something, right? So we need to understand what it is. Is it to automate their processes as they look right now, or is it something of more transformational nature? So if the business express something like they need to reduce the manual work for a transactional process because they don't have the time to do anything else, that would be more of an automation case. But if they're looking into increasing the visibility of whereabouts of our containers, where information exists in many different data sources, such as supplier portals or emails from suppliers, then that's a different ballgame. So if we move on to the next slide, please. The questions are quite fundamentally different in terms of how we need to approach them. So what we try to do is to start off with a screening process or a screening activity where we interview the stakeholder. And here we have very strong functional expertise supporting us, which I believe is key to understand whether this is more of a clear automation case, or if we need to know quite a bit more and do some kind of an assessment. The next step after we understand whether to automate or optimize would be different kind of capabilities. So in the upper space would be the automation teams coming in, and the lower path there would be bringing in business consultants to do an assessment.
So Anders, are these kind of opposite decisions that are indicated here in the little bar charts here? If you have a lot of depth versus if you have a little depth, is that what these are?
Not really. So a detailed assessment, then we would typically pick one functional area, such as accounts payable, and we would make it more of a deep dive and get more executable recommendations. But if we have, let's say we're approaching finance as such, a much broader area, what we could do is more of a broader assessment to understand what do we prioritize first. We will get executable recommendations, but not to that extent as in the detailed assessment. So look at the broader assessment as something we would use to create some kind of roadmap for a larger scope.
And then how do you make the decision about which technology to apply to which problem?
So if you're looking at if we can move on to the next slide. I think I can talk to that on that slide. So if we look at the different capabilities we have brought in RPA, we use Blue Prism as platform. And then we have also done testing Alteryx, where we have we've just concluded a very good pilot, which shows a lot of opportunities. For me, Blue Prism is more for maybe the simpler tasks of very high transactional volumes. Whereas Alteryx, just in the pilot, when we have tested this, we have automated a quite complex process with 15 different Excel spreadsheets of quite large amount of data as data sources. So here, is it really complex to do, or is it more of a highly transactional nature? I think that's one distinguisher, but I think also this is something we need to mature into. We've also brought in Exacto that you saw in the slide that Ritters presented. We use this machine learning tool to extract information from, in this case, invoices. The functional expertise I mentioned comes from a small but very good business consulting team. This also is from HCL. We do some custom apps development, and we also have offshore. And now we get into why do we have offshore in the business process automation initiative? And that's because we are looking in more to what Ritters mentioned before, looking more at outcomes. A lot of people think that, or say at least, that automation will take away the need or the benefits of offshore due to a labor arbitrage. I don't think so at all. I think it's automation plus offshore.
Interesting. So
will be able to outcome.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of this, when it's process optimization, where does that happen? Is that the business consulting team? Is it in-house? Is it offshore?
So if looking into taking a look at the conceptual solution, doing the assessments and coming up with a conceptual solution, that is the business consulting team that do that. What the solution will be, that might be something custom.
Okay.
It typically involves some element of RPA, often at least, but that could lead to building a new capability or leverage something existing. So we don't know that. We base it on what are the objectives of the business really, and build something that is relevant to them. We want to play in the space between traditional IT and the business and find something relevant there and enable our business better.
That, don't we? In between the two different sides very often. We'll have to think of a new name another day. So tell us how did you come to the decision to work with HCL? You work with other IT services partners and management consultants. So how did HCL come into the mix for this particular set of initiatives?
So I was brought into the IT department of Husqvarna back in 2012 to lead the contracting of our first offshoring activity. And HCL had then been selected for that. And that was basically the start of this journey. So I've been there from meeting number 2 with HCL, and I've stayed close to that engagement since then. And I led a supply development activity where we looked into new areas or areas that we hadn't discussed with HCL in the past. And that's where RPA came up as one opportunity. We have a strong relationship and we intend to strengthen that even further. And I believe that we have only scratched the surface of the value of that future partnership.
Fabulous. So tell me, in terms of what you're hoping to gain out of the initiatives that are underway at the moment, how do you define what good looks like? So how do you, what do you plan to do at time saved and who's counting what? How does it work? Tell me how good is defined and articulated for you as you move forward.
We can move to the next slide. And I wish I could show you a mature set of KPIs, and I can't. We're looking into how we will build our next generation of, call it the business process automation center of excellence, and we're just not there. But if I would like to point out a few points here that, what would good look like for me without putting any numbers there. I don't feel I'm ready for that. Okay. But for example, we know what the core for the ERP is and what is in scope for automation. That would allow us to be fast and good, I believe. We're not really there, but I would like to get there.
Yeah.
Good would be if IT and business are integrated in continuous improvement activities, for example. And that we from IT is just one step behind in automating the changes. I believe it's all about how do we digitize our processes or automate our processes. And there we need to work together. I do not feel that we are there. I would like to get there. We should, of course, have a high degree of automation in our transactional processes. And I strongly believe in process monitoring. And I want to be able to monitor our critical business processes and have these defined alerts that I mentioned before.
Yeah.
And last, we're talking about digital colleagues. We have human colleagues, digital colleagues. I would like us to be able to do the workforce planning together. So imagine we have a manager with somebody going into retirement and being asked the question, would you like to hire a new employee, or would you like the equivalent amount of money to the salary and spend that on automating your processes? The answer might differ between different people, but if we take this into account, or if we do this kind of bring this into the workforce planning, the process automation into the workforce planning, I really feel that we would be able to scale up fast. It would also set an expectation on the departments that they would work with automation activities.
So this reminds me of what I was talking about earlier with this new plasticity of thinking. It's a lot of these they're very much culture and how people communicate and interact and what decisions can be made about how to move forward. You know, are you confident that you do sound quite confident actually that you know you're in a good place to at least frame these questions so that people can start thinking about how they're going to move forward? Yeah.
But I think that we need to get much further up on the strategic agenda of our divisions.
Okay.
Here. That is absolutely something we need to do, and I think we're slowly getting there. But this activity started off in IT, facing both the challenges of the, call it traditional IT. It was a little bit like we brought in, it was like something the cat brought in and dropped on the carpet from an IT perspective. And at the same time, it was not really on the strategic agenda of the business divisions, but they were interested. But slowly, I think we're approaching a point where we hopefully will get onto the strategic agendas and that we are aligned within IT to start scaling this up.
And tell me, how do you grapple with those challenges between the business and IT? You're not alone facing these challenges. We hear about this a lot. So have you any top tips to share with people that are listening about what you find working well?
Grab hold of the right stakeholder, I believe, and build that relationship, I think is the best way to do it. And for our largest business division, I think we have that guy on board now.
Yeah, that's a very human
promising
thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Very human. All right. I wonder, Ritesh, if I could call on you for a second to talk about who do you feel should be leading automation? Leading automation in an organization. Do you have a view on whether it should be IT-led, whether it should be business-led, something in between?
So, Miriam, interesting point, and the answers keeps changing depending on the automation focus. But more and more, I'm seeing business becoming the owner for automation or digitization at large, because automation is moving away from FT reduction, cost reduction aspect, and moving towards customer experience as well. COVID has taught us or help us to understand that the entire boundaries about people required in office is slowly fading away. So anywhere and everywhere, whether it is IT driving it or business, but business getting onboarded right to the CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, Chief Digital Officer, CEO, Head of Operations is absolutely critical, because it is not a fancy toy anymore that people do certain pilots around, and even from the survey, what people seem to be talking about, the return on investment and the scaling as a big challenge. And for digitization or transformation to really scale, business being onboarded is very much required. And there needs to be a business sponsor, just like Anders said, who signs up to the initiative, shoulders the responsibility. The nuts and bolts can be done by the technology guys, but business needs to be in the driver's seat.
Okay, good perspective. Thank you for that, Ritesh.
So back coming in from IT, I absolutely agree. So I'll be most willing to hand over a bunch of responsibilities when the business steps up.
And Anders, I said that because I'm lazy, but I agree with you.
Yeah. Well, I'm lazy too.
Let's not admit to this. Okay. So if I could go back to you, Anders, and ask you about what's next. What do you want to achieve next? What's next in your program from here? So we talk a lot about the digital one office and the Triple A Trifecta and integrated automation. All effectively at their heart have multiple lever pulls in play at once, and lots of integration and smooth data flows and predictive decision making. So what's your vision moving forward?
First of all, we need to scale. We need to scale what we're already doing, getting on the strategic agendas of the divisions. Hopefully, we'll get there. But beyond that, I think the opportunities are amazing. But I think sooner or later, we need to decide as a company, what kind of company do we want to be? What are the people in our organization supposed to do? Should they focus on innovation, or should they focus on basically punching in data in different systems, if I may be a little bit blunt there, because that is happening a lot. That's one thing. I also think that we need to look at this from the, call it, employee experience perspective. A lot of these automation tools are not giving the employees another experience. We definitely need to get to that too, and also start to hide our very complex landscape and allow the end users to stop working in their application verticals, or at least to a large degree, and stop working in the process horizontal, getting a more of a unified experience.
Absolutely. We call that concealing things in the digital underbelly.
Yeah.
So wherever there is complexity, nobody needs to know about it, if at all possible. So Ritesh, how about you? What's next on the cards for HCL's vision in terms of digital colleagues? How do you see it playing out in the future?
So Miriam, and again, still slightly aspirational, but the way we see digital colleague evolving is, we believe the number of digital colleague within our support functions, operations functions, IT will phenomenally increase. And very soon we might start saying that in a certain process, I have 50 human and 30 digital colleague working, supporting our human workforce. So essentially, we believe it is going to become a building block, almost a productized offering, which we already have a lot of pieces, and will be happy to share with anyone who would want to understand the details around it. A fully functional digital colleague that can do any function like customer onboarding, invoice processing, accounts payable, in healthcare, claim processing, in retail, customer onboarding, fulfillment, and aspects like that, right? So,
wow, they'll need a CV to list out all their job skills. Yeah,
very interesting, Miriam, because now we have already created a internal facing marketplace in which, just like a human colleague, someone can hire a digital colleague and say, I am looking at a digital colleague that cost me X $1,000 and do these 5 things. So this is how we are first internalizing it and starting to work with certain customers who are looking at doing a beta around that and take it forward basis their business needs.
Wow. Okay. Sounds good. Thank you, Ritesh. And thank you, Anders. That's been absolutely amazing to hear your views and to hear your story, Anders. So I am going to pass back to my very capable colleague, Ollie, who will handle some questions at the end of this. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Miriam. Don't worry, we'll throw some questions in your direction. You don't get any time off here. So let's stay on topics. We've got a few interesting questions coming in, and do keep asking them, because even if we don't get a chance to answer them live on air, we'll try and follow up afterwards. But here's a nice open one that I think, Anders, you've touched on a little bit, but I'd be interested to get Ritesh, your perspective. Is what are the top 3 challenges faced in scaling automation that you've come across? Because this must be a question you get a lot when clients are either at the start of an engagement, or perhaps you're taking over an existing one and trying to bring some scale there. So what sort of bumps in the road do you see most often?
Great question. So 2 or 3 things, the 3 things that I would say. One, incorrect expectations in terms of what automation can do. Sometimes we tend to believe within 3 months I'll get the ROI. Doesn't happen. Depending on the location, the ROI can vary drastically. Point number 2, one technology or one product solving it for me, be it RPA, artificial intelligence, analytics, and aspects like that. There is a toolkit or a tool set that is required to get the right kind of scaling of automation. And the third thing is the mindset, because even today, a lot of organizations or the employees of the organization get scared that if something is going to automate, I'm going to lose my job. So doing the right kind of change management is extremely important, because if the operators of that business function, be it IT, infra, or ops, are not onboarded, there is no way automation can really be scaled.
Perfect. Okay, and John, so sort of staying on that line, I'm just thinking of the poll that we ran 40 or so minutes ago that had finding processes in the first place to automate as one of the biggest challenges. We've got a question here, which is, what approach have you found works best for identifying new automation opportunities and filling the project pipeline? And they've given some examples, so interviews with senior leaders, outreach to middle managers, survey of frontline workers, so we're right at the coalface there, or process discovery tools and process mining tools. So perhaps Ritesh, if you could kick us off again with the approaches that you use, and then Anders, perhaps afterwards, if you could give us a quick run through of how you prioritize. So you know, which areas do you kind of think we can get value from this now, and then let's build out our pipeline later on?
Absolutely. So one is a top-down, bottoms-up approach in terms of understanding from a top-down perspective. What are the priorities? Let's understand where it hurts the most and start solving that problem. It could have a ROI, it could have a compliance problem, it could have a customer satisfaction, and so on and so forth, and start looking at that dimension. Now, to get to the root of which process to identify, it almost always is a combination of certain level of process mining wherever data is available. And the second is essentially figuring out a heat map. Look at a function, a business area, understand where most of your cost or wastage is, and target that. In our experience, this exercise can be done in as short as a week for straightforward processes. And for some of the more extensive one, we do it over 4 to 8 weeks time to really understand where we will get the biggest bang for the buck. Anders, over to you if I missed certain points.
So if we're looking at it, how we have been working up to this point, it's basically been knocking on doors and word of mouth. And when we have a few good stakeholders that are very interested in what we're doing, the word has spread quite a bit. But in order to scale fast, which we need to do to get the benefits out of the investments, we need to have it on getting away from the grassroots initiative to something that is more top down, and having expectations set on the business units, and they should be followed up, rather we being followed up for each and every case, which actually we're doing right now. It is too slow the way we're working right now. We need to turn it around, and we from IT should rather look into how we do capacity management rather than chasing for opportunities. That's where we get to the point that business need to start taking lead in this.
Fair enough. Okay, so another question here. So I'm an IT guy as well, although I wasn't very technical, which is why I'm an analyst now and not an IT guy anymore. We've got a question here around the use cases and applications for customers and customer experience. And I think that we're all guilty perhaps of looking at these type of technologies from a back office perspective, either driving out cost or helping people be more productive or something along those lines. Have you got any examples of use cases where these technologies have helped boost customer experience or even to open up new revenue channels or something along those lines? Perhaps again, Ritesh, if you kick us off.
Absolutely. Rather more than the customer experience, I'll talk about customer well-being. So HCL has launched certain projects working with the governments to start with in India to figure out how can we react better to the COVID response, creating help desk in a couple of days time, creating automated system to interact with the customers, taking their feedback, surveys and aspects like that. Starting from those points to in a supply chain automation, how can I deliver goods faster and better to the customer? How can I make sure that the customer feedback is taken into account in a contact center scenario? And that's the reason I said it is not RPA alone. The voice analytics, the next best action that comes from a contact center standpoint. All of these are becoming building blocks, be it retail, be it healthcare, be it banking and financial services, because now the customers need it now, better, faster, and at a superior quality, and they want themselves to be heard. So when we are doing that, this entire gamut of automation technologies need to be a driver in delivering new products, launching new products in the market. And that is what we are looking at doing with a lot of our customers.
Cool. And Anders, can you see any immediate use cases that you'd like to explore? And I appreciate, I like the analogy of knocking on doors right now. I get that 100%. I think a lot of organizations are in a similar boat. But do you see any moves to deliver front office improvements, if we call it that, so focusing on customer experience, or do you think for the time being you'll continue hunting in some of those back office areas?
I think there is a lot of opportunity in the customer experience or in the front office, as you say. We haven't really started to engage in that end yet, but we would very much like to do so. So I cannot really mention any specific cases that we have identified, but there should be ample opportunities in that space as well. Absolutely. In the end, what they need in many cases is access to information and being connected to the back office. And I think there's a lot to be done in that space in Husqvarna.
Yeah, and that's where we see the magic happening a lot. That's, as part of our digital one office model is from front office through to back office, automating those entire processes. So we've got time for one final question. It's a bit of a big question, but I think it's absolutely fair. Which is scaling across the enterprise is a hugely complex project requiring massive change in human behavior across the organization, right? And I think we all get that. I think we've all bumped into change aversion at some stages. Do organizations recognize this, and how does their ability to deliver and manage internal behavioral change make intelligent automation projects a success? So Ritesh, again, because you're going to have an interesting perspective from all of the different clients that you work with. Do you think organizations know how big a project this is when they first go off on an automating?
No, unfortunately, no. Most organizations are successful in the pilot project. They're successful in doing the first couple of deployments because the impact on manpower is limited. As they start scaling their automations initiative, their digitization initiative, the change management is often not considered, and hence we strongly propose that in any engagement, change management needs to be embedded. It has to be made a part of the culture. Even if the end intent is to reduce cost or impact on full-time employees, there needs to be a change management that help people understand how they will be upskilled, what new skills they will attain. And interestingly, in some of our customers, we have seen them reskilling their workforce to become digital consultants or process owners or automation experts. So that roadmap needs to be very clearly defined. Otherwise, the scaling becomes a big challenge because top-down works only to a certain extent. Beyond that, the workforce need to be empowered, enabled, and involved.
Fair enough. I'll tell you what, let's go. So we've got about 30 seconds left. I'm going to put my colleague Miriam on the spot. Miriam, you must have spoken to a ton of enterprise leaders over the last year or so, at least on this project. Do you think there's a moment when they realize actually this is much bigger than we thought? It's not a simple exercise. We're going to have to do a lot more here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I was about to chip in on that last question there to say the same thing. I think I'd love to write a piece about transformational leaders because I think there's something very special with the people that can cope with all of that resistance to change, who can cope with, people being on board one minute and maybe not the next, who can cope with that ambiguity of driving change throughout an organization and bringing people along with them. Like they need to be exceptional leaders. And I love talking with people like Anders, and we get to meet so many of these people throughout our work, but it's a very brave undertaking because there's so much resistance and so many people that almost have a vested interest in not making it work at various points, particularly when they're scared. So I think it's an extraordinary undertaking, and it takes it takes these very, very special people to do it. So I've really enjoyed talking with Anders in the run up to preparing for this webinar, and I really, value the leveled way he talks about things. He's, there's a lovely way that Anders, that you talk about seeing these difficulties, but you're always very, very reasonable in your approach to resolving them and getting through them and getting to the next stage. I think that's really, really difficult to maintain that throughout circumstances where people get rattled every so often, which they do when, you know, when they're not sure how it's going to pan out in the long term. So that's a very non-technical answer, Ollie. It's just all human stuff.
Non-technical, but wildly complimentary to Anders. So well done,
Thank you
Anders.
so much for that.
Very welcome.
It's an endorsement. Well, you know, that's all the time we have today, I'm afraid. So all that's left to be said is a massive thank you to Anders, Ritesh, and Miriam. It's been really fantastic, really interesting webinar. And thank you to everyone who turned up, and to all of those who are listening to this afterwards in the recorded version. Thank you to you guys too. So that'll do for now, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.